Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another installment in my Mortal Kombat Missing Of series, where we take a roster, break it down, and analyze and see what is going on with those characters in the present, and how they have been changed and altered for the new era. With this being my 4th installment in the series, that means that we've blasted through the Reboot Trilogy, the 3D Trilogy, as well as MK4. So I do strongly recommend you give those a watch, as they all kind of thread, tie and weave into today's episode. And this one in particular will be quite a herculean task, as we will be touching on the original trilogy of games. And my oh my, is there a lot to get through here. Now, due to how many characters are introduced in this trilogy, I have slightly tweaked the formula for this video specifically. Because previously, where I talk about the characters that do feature on the base roster, and how they've been changed and altered for that of the present, as well as where they are now, the core of NRS rosters has always largely consisted of the original trilogy of characters, which in layman terms, basically means I'd have to cover 2/3 of the base roster. So to strictly streamline this video, I will be excluding the base roster from this video to focus on the lost characters in the new era, as there's a lot of them that feature in the game's story, whilst there are others only mentioned or merely hinted at in this new reality. Thus, going forth, the criteria will be the following. I will be touching on characters mentioned or featured in arcade ladder endings, as it does give us a good idea of what we can expect of them moving forward. And 2, I will be lightly touching on cameo characters, excluding the duplicates, because although some do feature in the game's story, it's only ever really up to the extent of a supporting role, as none truly have a really big impact on the game's main narrative. And of course, I will be touching on the characters from the original trilogy, and what could they possibly be up to at this point in time. But as always, you know what to do with these sorts of videos. If you like what we do here and wish to see more, please do give it a thumbs up and of course subscribe. It supports both myself and the channel. And without any further ado, let's begin. So to sort this list out bit by bit, let's get through the cameo roster first, as it does of course feature characters that we know exist in the present, but know very little of in the current canon. Starting off with arguably one of the most iconic figures in the series, the Shogun Prince Goro. Now, the former champion of Mortal Kombat is in a very familiar yet different position in this universe. Whilst the Mortal Kombat tournament continues to exist, it's not quite the same one forged in bloodshed of previous timelines. Here, it would instead be a competition between Earthrealm and Outworld, one that would test the fortitude of their champions and their will. Because of the nature of it and change of the overall tournament, Goro here isn't quite held up in the same high esteem. Even so, the Shogun would still continue to work as Shao's right-hand man, being his muscle and a very reliable enforcer amongst his ranks here. It's not heavily explored in this game, but Goro's appearance here does give us a tiny bit of insight on the Shogun Kingdom and its relationship with Outworld, as it looks to be in a state of harmony with the royal line. But there is a particular line in game that possibly hints that that may have not always been the case. According to Sindel, when she's talking of Shao's accolades, one of the titles she bestows upon him is the Conqueror of the Quartan Plains. For those unaware, the Quartan Plains would actually be where the Shogun reside. It's where the kingdom is placed. So it is believed that long prior to the events of MK1, that the Outworld royal line clashed with the Shogun Empire before subjugating them under their rule, with Shao Kahn of course being the one to do so. Very little's documented about this time, as it's completely unknown how many fell, but with the Dracos in service to Outworld's army, it can be believed that they took quite a devastating hit. Unfortunately, outside of this, we don't know much beyond that, as King Gorbak is never heard from or even mentioned. And tiny little detail I did want to note. as it's a minor thing, but something I did pick up on, is that never at any point in time is Goro referred to as a prince. Maybe meaning that once Sindel conquered the Shokan Empire, she would strip Goro and his father of their royalty, only wishing there to be one true royal line of Outworld. And since we're on the topic of Shao's army, let's touch on Motaro here, a figure we haven't seen since Mortal Kombat Armageddon. So man, it's been a while, and with that said, after his absence, what has Motaro gotten up to? Well, tragically not very much. After his decade-long absence, very little was known of this Motaro, as well as the Centaurs as a whole. Because even in this new timeline and era, the Centaurs aren't even referred to by name. Thus, we are left to assume a lot of things of what has become of him, as well as his people. Now, considering what Shao did to the Shokan, I definitely think it's quite safe to assume that a very similar situation happened here with the Centaurs, leading to them inevitably falling into the service of Shao. It's currently unknown in this timeline if their race war with the Shokan still rages on, but it's not something I would rule out. It's kind of impossible to know, because at no point in time during the game's story do we ever see Goro or Motaro interact. What's been the most intriguing bit of information to come out of this though, is that during Shao's coup, when we do see Motaro, we see that he's joined the side of Shao. But in Kitana's arcade ladder ending, we do see a centaur, possibly Motaro, battling against Shao's forces under the command of Kitana. So possibly, in between the end of the game's story, maybe a form of peace was settled between both sides. There's also the possibility that the Centaurs see Mileena as a worthy empress to succeed Sindel, possibly hinting at some previous turmoil with the former empress, as Sindel was known to not like every race she governed. With Outworld under Mileena's control, they could see this as a very fresh slate for their people. Moving over to Earthrealm, let's touch on a character that is both a cameo and does feature in an arcade ladder ending, Jackson Briggs. Now the Jax of this era seems to be in a very different position from his older self. No longer tied to the special forces or the military, he does look to be an FBI operative, taking a very deep and keen interest in the supernatural, especially after encountering the likes of Ken Shi, due to the threats that Outworld poses, as well as the fact that now they've shown a keen interest in Earthrealm. He would form the Outworld Investigation Agency, a way to combat the threats of the unknown. So a lot has significantly changed with him here, and due to his late arrival, he still retains his arms, for now. Understandably, due to this change of circumstance, it may mean that he's yet to meet Vera, as she's not at all mentioned in game, which also currently means no Jackie. So if that plot thread is to unravel in the present, then it may only ever come at the expense of his arms being turned to base. Get your bingo cards ready, everyone. So yeah, Jax is a very different character, which takes us on to his former partner, Sonya Blade. This is a duo that's kind of joined at the hip here. So of course, with Jax's absence, I'm not at all surprised that she hasn't been seen or heard from in this timeline. In fact, at most, she's only merely alluded to by Liu Kang when he talks to Johnny. She doesn't at all feature in any arcade ladder endings, but oddly enough, does actually feature in an animated vignette for Mileena's Invasion season of Mortal Kombat 1. Now, Invasions itself is not actually canon to the timeline at all. It largely exists in its own reality, with more of its own separate game mode than anything truly narratively driven. Sonya's existence in the present is all currently up in the air, as this is the most we can currently say about her due to her absence. And of course, with Sonya, you gotta have Kano. He's never seen, heard of, or mentioned in-game, but we do definitely know that he must exist in the present up to a certain extent here, because the Black Dragons most certainly do, having been mentioned by Liu Kang in an opening intro. It's kind of hard to say what direction they'll go in with this character, but I am very invested to see how they'll reapproach the Sonya and Kano feud. a rivalry that's built on her partner's death. Maybe in this timeline, it is Kano that's responsible for taking Jax's arms. You never know. But yes, sadly outside of the intros, very little was known of Kano and the Black Dragons here. And honestly, I kind of like that they haven't been mentioned too much. It kind of plays into that secret organization from the shadows aspect of the criminal organization. Next, we have Striker, and he exists. He's here. Alright, memes aside, nothing is really known of Striker in this era, as he's strictly reserved to that of the Kameo roster. He isn't mentioned in passing at all, or arcade ladder endings. All in all, he's simply yet to kind of be adapted to this new era, so it's nigh impossible to say what's going on with him here. The only way I could see them approaching his character again is maybe repackaging him part of the Outworld Investigation Agency. By doing so, it allows us to modernize the character while simultaneously keeping him in the realm of possibility, as Striker is yet another character that hasn't appeared in a very long while. With the special forces out the way, let's move over to the Lin Kuei, as there is an iconic duo that does feature in the game, Cyrax and Sektor. And the pair of cybernetic ninjas look to be in a very different place in this universe. With the Lin Kuei forged in the vision of Bi Han's and Kuai Liang's father, one for good that would protect Earthrealm, it means that the cyber initiative would never really take off here. It's only until his passing under Bi Han's rule where that becomes a completely different situation. Having an unending lust for power, Bi Han would turn against tradition, seeking wealth, greed, and success, instead of the selfless protection of Earthrealm, which it was built upon. Wishing to see the Lin Kuei reach its maximum potential, he would have the clan embrace the Age of Steel, with Sektor at his side, forging it. There does look to be a very different approach to the Cyber Initiative, because instead of cybernetic augmentations, it looks like now they are forging suits of armor, ones somewhat akin to that of Iron Man's. But that's merely an assumption of my end from what we've seen. In terms of appearances here, we do actually hear and presumably see Sektor in Sub-Zero's arcade ladder ending, looking to be quite a bit of a tech wizard forging the suits. Cyrax, on the other hand, is yet to be mentioned at all, currently completely absent in terms of references. Now, our final cameo to cover is Chameleon. This take on Chameleon is incredibly different from her previous self. With the Saurians having never been enslaved or purged under Shao, Zartera is given the opportunity to grow and flourish, one united under Empress Sindel's rule. Outside of this though, little is known of their empire or even their matriarch, but they do seem to be on pretty good terms with the Outworld line, as one of them, Chameleon, would be taken and trained under the Umgadi, protecting Sindel's lineage and their bloodline. Understandably, due to the vast changes and alterations of Zartera, the ripple effect created here has Syzoth and Chameleon go off in their own completely separate directions, as they don't even really seem to be aware of each other's existence. For the most part, Chameleon only plays a supporting role in-game, but it does look like after so long, she has finally found her footing in the mainline canon. Moving on to mentioned characters, let's touch on one that's still a hot topic of debate right now, Hanzo Hasashi. And immediately, right out the gate, this is a completely different take on the character, because unlike the other fighters who feature on the roster, he would not appear until much later on, where he's a young teenager, no longer donning the mantle of Scorpion, nor having been born into the Shirai Ryu. Hanzo is instead an outsider and an orphan, only having been brought in by the likes of Smoke, as they sought out new initiates for the Shirai Ryu. Hanzo could be seen as their most prized gifted pupil, blending his eager youth with a very fierce thirst for combat. And from what you can tell, fundamentally from the ground up, Hanzo is completely altered in the new era, as he never loses his family, wife nor son. However, the most puzzling change and alteration has come in the form of Harumi, his former wife, who is scheduled to be wed to Kuai Liang, the previous timeline Sub-Zero, his former rival, and this world's Scorpion. So yeah, from what you can tell, things look to be vastly different for him here, as moving forward we will see him being trained and inevitably gain the mantle of Scorpion. When does all this happen though? It's completely up in the air though. Our next mentioned character is also yet another figure that has been changed due to the alterations of the timeline, and that is Jade. With Xiao's conquest having never occurred, the Jade of this timeline is no longer one shackled and bound by the side of the Emperor, nor that of his adopted daughter, Kitana. Here, Jade is actually in quite a high position amongst Outworld's royal court, owning the title of Countess amongst their people. Sadly, outside of this, very little was known about this take on the character, as the only bit of information surrounding her right now is her title. We know nothing of her relationship with Kotal, nor that of her mother. The final off-screen mentioned figure here is yet another Shogun, and that is Shiva. And honestly, much about what I've said about Goro kind of applies to her here. She's only ever so briefly mentioned in passing as one of the many figures that fought and was defeated by Raiden during the tournament. Due to this, I think it's pretty safe to assume that she's no longer Queen of the Shogun, simply a very strong adversary recognized amongst Outworld's people. Now with the mentioned characters out the way, this finally brings us onto the characters that are currently absent in the new era. Starting off with everyone's favourite edgelord, Noob Saibot. And this one should be pretty obvious. Noob's creation is only ever made possible due to the death of Bihan at the hands of Hanzo Hasashi. But with Hanzo having never been part of the Shirai Ryu prior to the events of the game, as well as the Lin Kuei having been a force of good, they are simply two different paths that diverge in very different directions. Even in story, while Sub-Zero is beaten by Scorpion, he is never killed and thus exists in the present. So with that in mind, the approach they'd have to take here for this character would have to be vastly different from anything we've seen before in the canon. Bihan's ascension to Noob Saibot is only ever something achieved in death, but with his ties severed to Quan Chi now, it's gonna be quite interesting to see how this is approached moving forward. Now, mild spoilers, I guess? There has been some rumbling surrounding Titan Havoc, but that's currently a lot of hearsay, seeing as Kombat Pack 2 is yet to be officially revealed. Seeing as we've covered the rest of his race, it would be criminal to leave out my personal favourite of the Shogun, Kintaro of the Tigers. And he's currently sitting in that Shiva boat right now, because unfortunately, due to the very light lore that is surrounding the Shogun, not only do we not get a name drop of Kintaro, but we're left quite uneducated on the relationship between the two races of Shogun, the Tigers and the Dracos. Because of this, we don't know if their lingering rivalry permeates in the new era, as we do only see the Dracos in the game's story here. If you really want to overlook it, there could be the possibility that they may have been driven to extinction, either by their Draco brothers, or possibly even General Shao. It's really hard to know right now, but it's still something I wish to highlight. Now moving back over to Earthrealm, let's touch on the speedster of the franchise, and former member of the Black Dragon clan, Cabal, and very little is known of him here. Considering how early on we are in the new era, and his absence in game, I do think it's quite safe to believe that he may still be associated with the Black Dragons, as it was a key part of his backstory in prior timelines. Of course though, with that in mind, and the Black Dragon's absence here, it's kinda impossible to know what's going on with him here, as he hasn't been fully established in the new era. And our last and final character here is a personal favourite of mine, the Shaman of the Matoka, an avatar of the Great Spirits, Nightwolf. And I gotta be real, I was very surprised that there was no mention of Grey Cloud here. In fact, there's no mention of anything associated with the Motoka, nor that of the Great Spirit. But I do think there's a good reason why. It narratively focuses on Outworld and re-establishes the universe. So with the lack of focus on Earthrealm, it does kind of make sense why he doesn't appear here. I do also believe that it may be due to his ties to the Black Dragons. Because if Nightwolf's arcade ladder ending is believed to be true, of which many are in 11, then prior to him becoming Nightwolf, Grey Cloud would bear close ties to the Black Dragons, only gaining the title once he stood up for his people. And from what you can tell, with the absence of the Black Dragons, it kind of explains why he hasn't appeared here. For now though everyone, that has been it for all of the missing characters from the original trilogy of games. And man, from what you can tell, this has been quite an undertaking, as it features so many characters across the board here. One thing I do wish to highlight though, is just how big and significant the ripple effects of Liu Kang's vision are here. While some of these changes might be small, in the grand calculus of it all, the butterfly effect that resonates through this timeline cannot be understated. It has impacted so many different characters in a multitude of different ways. Thus, I'm very intrigued and very invested to see what will become of them moving forward, as I have no doubt they will be slowly reintroduced one by one. So, with all of the characters I've covered here and mentioned, who are you the most interested in seeing return, and why? How would you like to see them be reincorporated to the new era? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear some of your ideas and suggestions. But for now everyone, that has been it for me. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.